Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to today's episode of Her Version, a podcast dedicated to hearing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. If you are new to this podcast, make sure you follow, like, subscribe, and share. Today, we have an amazing guest speaker with us, Kimberley. Kimberley is a mother of 4 children who works in the world of empaths. Listen in as Kimberley speaks about the importance of setting boundaries, getting yourself out of depression, and knowing when to cut off relationships that fall under the category of narcissism. She was once emotionally sick and now is living a vibrant life full of laughter, authenticity, and contentment. Welcome, Kimberley.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. I know you are somewhere else. Where are you?
I'm in Australia.
Australia. I love that. Absolutely. Isn't this crazy that we can talk on video cross country?
Yes, it is.
So cool. So cool. How's your week been?
Yeah, really good, really good. I'm actually outside at the moment because I got a house full of people asleep, and it's actually not too bad out here. So I figured I wouldn't disturb them, and they can sleep, and I can do this.
I love that. What time is it?
It is 20 to midnight.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for coming on. So you've had a full day then. Are you in the future? What date is it?
I'm in the future. So it will be the 20th tomorrow, I think.
Wow, very cool. So it's 10 a.m. here. So
Yeah.
I'm still drinking my morning smoothie.
So as we talk within the next 20 minutes, I'll be in your day, and then I'll be tomorrow.
Wow, that's so cool. Wow, that's so awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to
You're very welcome.
or your night to sit down with us and share your story. I'm so excited to kind of unravel your past and your present and your future, and give a women hope as far as women who are enduring some of the stuff that you've gone through in your life. I think that it's so important, and there's so many women who are in this cycle and they don't even know they're in it. So I'm so happy to have you on. One of the things that I love to do before we actually kind of jump into all of the awesome things that you have going on in your life at the moment is I kind of like to kind of step back and talk about your early childhood and teen years, and kind of, where you were and what type of person you were growing up. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Absolutely not. No, that's fine. So my parents divorced when I was 2. My father wasn't that much in my life. I didn't realize until very much later that my mother was responsible for that. But a lot of the emotional abuse I realized I felt was from my sister as a child. She was 4 years older than me, and she was very, I guess, as a child, I would call it bossy and domineering, and we had the normal sibling rivalry, but she was very manipulative, and and I was just, this quiet-natured child. And so, she actually, I used to be frightened of her, and I used to be, we never really had that sister bond, which was very easily broken once we were older. So, thanks to my mother. So even as a child, I grew up, we never went without. I went to a private school and had all that. But what I lacked as a child was, I was emotionally neglected. So my mum didn't show much love and affection to me. If I wanted to give her a cuddle, she would just be like stiff as a board, and she wouldn't, wrap her arms around me, and I'd say to her, like, hug me, and she'd be like,
Wow.
And so, that really sort of made me become very much a people pleaser. I wanted her to accept me. I wanted to do good, and I wanted her to, I guess, just sort of, tell me how great I was. And sometimes she would, but not in the way that I wanted, I guess. But then she had this way of taking that away from me as well. So when I was a teenager, all I wanted to do was be a hairdresser. It was my dream. It was all I wanted to do. And that's what I wanted to pursue. And, so she didn't have any qualms with that. But once I stepped into, I got my apprenticeship, I went for all these job interviews, and, I was 16 by this time. And, back in those days, if you didn't get an apprenticeship at 16, you were pretty much too old as such. And so I actually got an apprenticeship with the most prestigious salon that was in Adelaide at the time. And so I was very, very lucky. And she just seemed to not be happy about it, not very supportive. I guess when I look back now, she was very much jealous of that for whatever reason. I mean, I don't know. So I was very much a go-getter. I was very much, if you told me I couldn't do something, I was like, you know what, I'm doing it. And then, once I went into, being 18 and 19, she very much controlled my life. She didn't like my friends. She didn't like me going out. She didn't like me doing this. She didn't like me doing that. And so at the age of 19, I left home and moved in with my boyfriend at the time, who was 27 with 2 children. He was a really nice guy and treated me well. But I was there for all the wrong reasons. I was there to get away from my mum. I couldn't live at home anymore.
Yeah.
And, so we parted ways because, he was a bit too boring for me. So then I went into a relationship that lasted only 12 months, but that was my first taste of being in a domestic violent relationship with an alcoholic. I was only 21. We just used to go out. He used to just lock me in the house and, just do all these crazy things. I was hairdressing at a salon at the time, and he had a pizza shop. And so he worked at nighttime, I worked during the day. And so very quickly it was like, when I finished work, I had to go to him. I wasn't allowed to be home on my own. I wasn't allowed to have friends. I wasn't allowed to do that. So I was very confused. I was like, I went from my mum doing that to me to now this. And so, after 12 months, I had the courage to leave. But then I had my first breakdown. I had my first mental breakdown when I was 23.
Wow.
And so I managed after a few months to pull myself out of that and, went back to work. And that was when I jumped into another relationship. And that was a relationship that was to last 7 years. And, I played hard to get. I made, he just wooed me. He wined and dined me. He was, again, 7 years older than me. I was 23. He was 31. He had been married. He had a child. And, and then all of a sudden, within a few months, I was back in this cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
And saw the red flags, ignored them.
Yeah.
I guess it's not that I really ignored them. It's just that I tried harder for him to accept me. I tried harder to please him, and I, thought if I do this, he's going to be nicer to me, and if I do that, he's going to, love me more, and if I, if I look after his child really well, he's going to, but his abuse escalated. He started drinking more. He was physically abusive. He was very emotionally abusive. And, I guess from the time that I met him, like I was 23, he was 31. And he told me that when every day pretty much of our relationship, that when I turned 30, he was going to trade me in for a younger model. And, so it was very, he disarmed me. He just
Yeah.
disarmed all part of who I was, and, my confidence in who I was. He was always telling me that, I was ugly and fat and this and that. And, and so I guess I became not used to it, but we started a business, and, we bought this big house, and before I knew it, I was just like, I'm so stuck, and
Yeah.
how do I get out of this? Is this going to be my life forever with this person?
Yeah.
And then I met my husband, who's now my husband. So he was sort of my way out. I met him in another state. And, looking back, I did used to think, oh, my God, am I jumping, from one bad relationship into another, because I didn't know a bar of him. I just, packed up, moved my stuff to Sydney, and moved in with him. And so then I was just like, but by that time I was pretty stuffed up, like I was not in a good place. I was not ready for another relationship. I mean, I look back now, we've been together 21 years, and I'm thinking, how did we last? Because,
Wow.
I guess what happened is, because I didn't have a break in that relationship, I had a meltdown, and he was very confused because he was ready to move forward, and I went into not mourning the relationship that I just lost, but I grieved, and I was like, oh my God, like I was reliving and thinking and doing all these things that were taking up a lot of the time at the start of our relationship. But within 12 months of us being together, we got married, engaged, married, and pregnant. So,
Wow. Could you
yeah.
tell a huge difference between the personalities and the culture within the relationship?
Well, yes, I could. In one aspect, I did. I think one thing I fell in love with my husband is he had a really good relationship with his mum. And when I first met his mum, the first thing he did was walked in and gave her a cuddle and a kiss. And I was just like, oh my God, I love that. Because my two previous relationships did not have a good relationship with their mum. So I did start to learn very quickly that, if they couldn't show love and affection to their mum, then this is why they treated women the way they did.
Yeah.
And, I mean, and even then I still didn't know what narcissism was. I still didn't understand what had happened to me.
Wow.
It actually wasn't until, I mean, all through that time I still had problems with my mum. She was very interfering, very controlling of my relationships. And, as much and all as I tried to assert boundaries, she would just smash them. And it wasn't until, probably I'd been with my husband for about 3 years, and my mother actually had fallen in love with my husband. And that set off a whole new dynamic and series of emotional abuse and neglect on my part, because she didn't care about me. She didn't give time to my children, or to my son at the time. In fact, when my mum would babysit, which wasn't very often, she would want my son to call her mum, and, she would tell me that, she would be a better wife to my husband and mother to my son than I would be. And, she really overstepped her boundaries, even with my poor husband. My poor husband, he was an interstate truck driver at the time, and, he'd come home and he'd say to me, he goes, your mum rings me all the time, like all day, every day. She's messaging me, what are you doing, where are you going? She asks me more questions than you do, and you're my wife, And so, I guess in a sense I didn't want to realize that was what was actually happening with her. And so I'd make up excuses for her, and, until it was just blatantly obvious. And, and then it got quite, I had my daughter, actually. It was my daughter that made me realize that, like, I needed to cut her off. My mum was doing very psychopathic things. She had convinced my whole family that her and my husband were having an affair and all sorts of stuff. She was getting people to prank call me. She was, getting SIM cards and pretending she was all these different women so that I would think that my husband was cheating on me. And, and she actually really almost sent me crazy. And so, yeah, when my daughter was 6 months old, I used to sit there and stare at her and go like, I don't know how you can treat your child like that. Like, wow. So I completely I sold my house, my husband and I moved, and I completely and utterly cut my whole family out of my life. But then I spent the next 15 years mourning like a death her.
Yeah.
Why wasn't I good enough? What did I do? How could she? And I was so confused. And, that's not what a mother does, like I knew she was a little bit like,
yeah.
Screwed up as I got older. And then it wasn't until after I'd completely cut myself off and then I went into like a real major depression. And then I started to think, no, there's something wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with me. And so that's when I discovered, narcissism. But, back 17 years ago, we had the internet, but we didn't have Facebook and stuff like that. So there was no real support system there. But I learned what was going on and I understood it. But I didn't let it go. I kept questioning her and I'm trying to understand her instead of understanding myself.
Got it. I have a question. Before we kind of dive into, your findings and what, you discovering narcissism, what was going on with your sister? Was your mom just attacking you this whole time, or was it like a back and forth?
Well, it was a back and forth. My sister got married when she was 19 and, she had 2 children and she had a daughter. And my mum was just in love with my niece, absolutely, totally just bestotted by her. And, and as she got older, she would just lavish money and take her on holidays overseas and stuff like this. And, and my sister used to say to me, like, oh, I hate it when mum has Taylor because, I'm really worried she's going to brainwash her. And I'd be like, yeah, I'd be worried too, And then, and my mum did some really strange things because my sister and her husband split up. He had an affair and the woman that he had an affair with and moved out with, my mum went and bought them all stuff for their house. And I was just like, what? So, she had her own dynamics with mum, and we would discuss it at times. We did sort of come together and then go apart and then come together, and but my mum somehow or other would just get in her head, and then all of a sudden, everything that my mother did, my sister would just forget. And I'm not a forgetter. I don't forget, and and then so all this thing with my husband, she brought my niece into it, she brought my sister into it, and it was just crazy. It was just really crazy, and I just had to. I was like, I'm not bringing up my children in this environment of toxicity, and I had to break the cycle somehow.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I don't. My sister, works in a hospital that's 20 minutes away from me. And if I need to go to the hospital, like I panic because I think, oh my God, what am I going to do if I bump into her? I know that she would talk to me like nothing's ever happened, but I can't do that. And to safeguard myself, like I just can't, I won't allow it to come back in. And I know if I open the door for her, she would, but I won't because I already know that, what's going to happen.
So she has similar traits to...
I do believe so. Yes, okay. I do. And then it wasn't until, like I'd cut off from mum and all that then I, had conversations with my dad, and in between all this, I had lost 2 babies. I had lost 2 babies at 2 different times in my 6 months of pregnancy. So I had to go through, labour and all this, and my mum made it all about her. it was just like crazy. And right at the time, as you know, my dad's like asking for a DNA test because he doesn't believe it on his daughter, and and she made all that about her as well. And it wasn't until I had these conversations with my dad, and I was like, like, why didn't you ever like want to see me as a child? And he said, I couldn't. She made it so difficult. And then when I started to understand the pattern of narcissism and her control, and because I grew up thinking that he didn't want to.
Wow.
But I soon learned that he just couldn't. She made it impossible for him.
Got it. When did he decide to finally tell you that? How old were you? Like 20s, 30s?
I was 36.
Wow.
Yeah.
No kidding. So all the way up until 36.
Yeah. I mean, he's, on his fourth wife now and lives somewhere in Australia somewhere. I don't know.
He might be attracting the same type because he probably maybe doesn't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Huh? That's interesting.
I don't know. I've had to just let go. So I have no emotion where my parents are concerned anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't. Some people say, oh, like, but that's your mom. And I'm like, you don't know what I've been through. You haven't walked in my shoes.
Yeah.
And for me, like I said, I mourned for almost 15 years. I mean, I'm 51 now. And it wasn't until I was 48 that I actually really just let it go.
Wow.
And just went, you know what? I was teaching my kids bad emotional habits. I was teaching them, bad things. So I had to change.
When you first entered the relationship with your now husband, did you deal with ramifications of the previous relationships that you had been in as far as being triggered or
Absolutely.
Can you kind of talk about that just a little bit? Because that's one thing that individuals have to realize is going to happen.
Absolutely. So, my husband would, well, I call him my husband. At the time, he wasn't, but so he would say to me, oh, like, would you like a cup of coffee? And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's all right. I'll get it. And he'd be like, no, just sit down. And I'd be like, oh, no. Oh, and I'd have like this anxiety attack because that was not normal for me.
Yeah.
It was not normal that he could make his own sandwich, get his own food, make his own coffee, and do things like that, or compliment me. Things like that would really trigger me. And then we'd have an argument about it.
Yep.
We would just literally have a massive argument about it because he'd be like, why won't you let me do these things? And I'd be like, I don't know. Because I was confused. I didn't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I did know, but I didn't know, if that makes sense.
100%. 100%. And I think that that's one of the things that individuals need to realize, who are coming out of abusive relationships, is just because you go into a good relationship doesn't mean there's still not going to be arguments because of what you just said. Like the first year or two can be just as volatile because we're making it volatile.
Absolutely. It's and again, it's like mourning. It's like mourning a relationship because you walk around on eggshells for so long that when you're not with them, you see everything in a different light, and you question yourself again, and then you question, and then you feel stupid. How could I do that? How could I let myself be treated that way? And how could I? And I was having this double whammy because, like from my mum, I had all this, so like I was never good enough for her. And then, and I was like, wow, if my mum, this is all I deserve, because if my mum thinks I'm a shit person, then this is why I'm getting treated this way. This is why I'm choosing these people. And and so the triggers were quite, and they're there. They got it, but you just have to, you have to somehow let go. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say that that's what you need to do because I swam for so many years, I mean, even like I said, at the time I'd gone through, 2 traumatic stillbirths. And so I had a lot going on. you know, my first child was with my ex-partner who was an alcoholic, and so he was like, oh, you know, I don't want to have a spastic baby with you, because the child had, I found out during my pregnancy when I was 6 months, that the baby had water on the brain, which is like hydrocephalus. He's like, I don't want to have a spastic child with you, and, you know, and you can just go in a hospital and do it all yourself, and I don't want a bar of it, and, you know. So, you know, I had to deal with that. And then when I met my husband, you know, we had my son, and then in between my son and my daughter, I had to go through it again.
Wow.
But it was a different process.
Yeah, I bet.
Much more loving process, you know, like the whole thing was different. You know, the first time with my ex, like I didn't hold the baby. I didn't want to show him that I was emotionally attached to this pregnancy thing going on that had happened. You know, I didn't want to show him that I was weak.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so then when I had to go through it again, then I felt really guilty because I didn't do what I did with that child, with my husband in that loving environment with my first child. So I went through a lot of guilt that,
Wow.
you know, I never held him, and yet I held him, and, you know, they were both boys, and, you know, yeah. And then I had twin girls. So I was given the gift of, you know, my losses, but the opposite sex. So
yeah,
I'm very lucky.
wow.